Okay, fans, we're back with part two of an epic interview with WCW kickboxing legend Sonny Onoo, and we're going to get to a gazillion fan questions that have rolled in over the last little bit. But in the first section of the second part here, King, you wanted to finish the thought that you were on before StreamYard was so rude to us.
Let me put my Santa Claus hat back on here, gentlemen. And Sonny was talking about a subject that is near and dear to me, Shuto, and my coach and mentor and good friend, a co-author of Rough and Tumble, is Eric Paulson. And Eric was the first American Shuto champion in Japan. And that is a promotion that I'm very, very well acquainted with. The history going back to Tiger Mask and Yori Nakamura. I actually coached some of Yori's techniques that I learned through Eric, some of Yori Nakamura's great techniques. And Shuto is just a tremendous organization, and I'm excited to hear that Sonny is with Shuto now. Such a great lineage. The original, I mean, they were doing fights before there was ever a UFC in Japan. And if you read Rough and Tumble, you really learn the history of submission wrestling and of what is now called mixed martial arts and of professional wrestling. So, Sonny, yeah, that's awesome news. Shit, now we don't have audio?
Oh, hold on a second. Well, this is one of those days. Okay, how about now?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we'll get through this eventually.
Okay. So
yeah, just let him go here.
Yeah. Mr. Sakamoto is a friend of mine for about 10 years. And matter of fact, I just contacted him that I'm going to be in Japan for Great Muta, a great professional wrestler known throughout the United States. Great Muta character is retiring January 22nd. And I made an arrangement for him to show up in New York at the AEW event and about a month and a half ago. And now that Sting is going to go over there to team up with Great Muta on his last wrestling event in Yokohama Arena. And who's going to be joining him is Darby Allin, Sting's current young partner, will be joining him in Yokohama as well. And interesting thing, as you know, you guys, that in professional wrestling, it's such a doing business in Japan is such a relationship thing. So a lot of things. It's hard to get things done unless you know some people, and you have, especially in Japan, a relationship is a big deal. And so Mr. Takeda, from president of Noah, reached out to AEW, try to get Sting to come in and be involved in the last match of Great Muta. Well, he ran into a couple of walls, and so he reached out to me, and I got it done. So I made arrangements. As they say, I was a great facilitator to make these things happen. So Sting, myself, and Darby Allin's going over there to from Great Muta's last event, and he's going to be facing. You remember Hakushi, the WWE Japanese wrestler from back in the days?
Yes. Yeah.
They're going to be wrestling him. And Marufuji is probably likely that one of the best, they say in the United States, a cruiserweight in Japan right now. He'll be wrestling against those guys, and Akira, who is one of the big stars from New Japan Pro Wrestling. So he'd be Akira, and I would love to see Akira and Darby Allin match up, and of course legendary Hakushi and Sting. And of course, Great Muta, and it's going to be quite the show. That'll be the main event, and doing all that stuff, you know, I got to do one more thing, which is you talk about Forbidden Door. I got Mr. Nakamura, Shinsuke Nakamura, WWE superstar. He's going to be wrestling Great Muta as well on January 1st. Just a few more days, he'll be going to Japan to wrestle against Great Muta. It's one of the very first time WWE superstars going to go back. Now, Shinsuke Nakamura was, as they say, young lion back in the days at New Japan under Great Muta. So this is something he wished that he wanted to do before Muta retired. So, you know, still working international, still making deals. And
Man, you're making some tremendous deals there, Sonny. That's awesome. And you talk about the history between Sting and the Great Muta. I mean, for those of us that men of a certain age and women, we remember that rich history, man. And that is tremendous. And I got to ask you, Sonny, do you know a Japanese wrestler by the name of Sho Tanaka?
Sure. Yeah.
I have a great story. What a great young man. So when Stephan Bonner had his first MMA fight, which I booked him for, I was broadcasting for House of Glory in New York City for their big summer show. The match was supposed to be against Matt Riddle. And Bonner and I went to the city together and shared a room together in Queens with that fight, because it was right at New York City Arena. And Matt Riddle had nothing on his social media. And Bonner was the marquee guy, along with Forrest Griffin from Ultimate Fighter. And Riddle was kind of a guy that had been on Ultimate Fighter, but that not many fans knew. This was before he went WWE. Sure. And Bonner says to me, he goes, I don't think this guy's going to do this match because he hasn't written anything. You know, you normally, when you got a big match like that, you promote it, right?
Right.
So we're at the hotel the day of the match, and it was before we went over to the arena. It was in the afternoon. And what do you know? We get a call from the promoter. Matt Riddle backed out. He literally had a booking the next day that he wrestled on. He said he was feeling sick or something, but he literally wrestled the next day. So I took the opportunity when I was calling the match to say that Riddle got a case of the pussyitis. And Sho Tanaka stepped up to have that match with Bonner last minute, speaking almost no English. And I remember we were in the back with Bret Hart, who was the special autograph signing guest.
Sure.
And I remember Bonner and I were telling Bret, and the guys, they just went out and wrestled, and they had a hell of a match. And that's really what pro wrestling is. They couldn't really talk to each other or communicate. It was Bonner's first pro wrestling match. He'd been training with Disco, with Glenn Gilberti in Vegas. And and I've got to give it to Sho Tanaka. You know, I know Sho had some MMA fights in Japan too. He had some pro wrestling matches against Kazushi Sakuraba, the legend. And this young man was a professional. He was awesome. And as Japanese wrestlers, Sonny, as you know, Japanese wrestlers often are great professionals.
Yeah, and what people don't realize about Japanese professional wrestler, you know, from back in the day of Masa Saito, who was Olympian, 1964 Olympian for Japan.
Absolutely.
Their lineage, I mean, they're almost all Yuji Nagata as well, right? All those guys, a lot of those guys are shooters. They're for real. They come from amateur background or sumo, one of the toughest men we know in professional wrestling, Haku Tonga. You know, of course, he was recruited out of Tonga to become a sumo fighter, sumo wrestler. And that's where he came.
Sonny, being old school shooters, we have to explain if there's pro wrestling fans that don't know sumo. Back in the way that I coach, and I still coach wrestling, high school wrestling, and I coached for Fighting Edge MMA school, which is with Phil Collins, who knows of your great history. He goes way back in kickboxing. Sumo, I still train that in high school because it's great for hand fighting. But way back when I was in school wrestling, we trained sumo, and you got to knock the guy out of the circle. A lot of people don't know the rules of sumo, and it's great for teaching hand fighting and balance.
Those slaps that they do, tataki, the hand slap they do.
Mm-hmm.
Holy bucket. I mean, yes, it's open-handed, but you get whacked with one of those, it's going to ring your bell. And very simple. Rules are simple. You touch the ground, you lose. You go out of the circle, you lose. And really easy for fans to follow. Even if you've never seen sumo, here's the rules. And watch these huge men go at it. And no weight class. Of course, there is advantage of that's why they eat chankonabe, as you know, the high calorie food that they eat. But way they train, I don't think people realize, Japanese pro wrestling dojo or school, a training center, is designed after Japanese sumo. So their training is, to say the least, it's pretty brutal. But I tell you what, you don't want to meet those guys anywhere,
Definitely not. Sonny, there's something really cool that I'm bringing to Great North Wrestling, sort of along those same lines. I was asked to be business development manager and broadcaster for a company called Shoot Pro Wrestling. They've had 3 shows. They feature collegiate wrestlers, UFC fighters that are signed UFC fighters because they can do grappling tournaments, and some of the top grappling competitors from companies like Fight to Win and High Rollers. And there's been 3 shows, and we're bringing a 4-man tournament to Great North Wrestling in 2023. I worked for Jake Shannon, who does scientific wrestling with Josh Barnett and Wade Chalice, and he used to do seminars going back with Billy Robinson, and he was very close to Carl Gotch. So it's a real shoot pro wrestling tournament, and it's pretty cool. It's really cool. And I'm excited to bring that, but you're absolutely right. The history of Japanese pro wrestling is really what the old history of American pro wrestling was. And that's why we're doing this show, Old School Shooters, to kind of educate the fans.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why when USC, I was at the very first UFC event where there was no weight class and all this different styles of martial arts went in an octagon, and look who came out. I know jiu-jitsu or Brazilian jiu-jitsu came out, but look who since then, and even then, who was really came out on top was wrestling.
And it definitely, Sonny. And we talk in the Rough and Tumble book. You mentioned Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. What a lot of people don't know is who trained the Gracies, and it was a gentleman whose ring name was Count Coma. First of all, the Gracie family ran the carnivals in Brazil, and it was a gentleman named Maeda, not Akira Maeda, but Mitsuyo Maeda. A lot of people confused with the Japanese pro wrestler Akira Maeda. This was way back to Mitsuyo Maeda. He's who trained the Gracies, and he had a long career in competing back in the day and taking on comers from the carnivals, but also in the old catch wrestling and early pro wrestling matches. And Elio Gracie, who did Elio Gracie ever fight? He only fought 3 guys. They were all pro wrestlers. He fought Matsuhiko Kimura, who broke his arm, and they named the Kimura. The Brazilians did after him. He fought Ladex Zbyszko, an old-time pro wrestling shooter who really brutalized Elio in that fight. They ended up calling a time limit on it. And he fought Fred Ebert, who was a journeyman pro wrestler. So the pro wrestling lineage and MMA lineages are combined, the roots of the same tree. Absolutely.
People don't realize especially young pro wrestling fans, you know, WWE and current AEW fans and MMW and you know, for that matter, even back in WCW, they don't really realize professional wrestling back in the days before even they had a television. You know, they will go like you were talking about. They were kind of part of a carny. You know, that they would go from town to town. And one of the things they used to do is they would, of course, they would have their shows, you know, pro wrestling shows and events but one of the things they used to do was they would invite a local tough guys, the wrestler, the farm boys, and say,
Oh, yeah.
get in the ring, $500 he'll get you, right?
Yep. Yep.
$500 if you stay in the ring with Masa Saito for 5 minutes. You survive 5 minutes in the ring with Masa Saito, and you know, you won yourself $500, so there'll be a prize money for it. And
Yeah.
and I talked to Masa Saito about it, you know, before he passed away.
Yeah.
And he would tell me the story. I said, Masa, did you ever lose? He goes, he kind of, you know, he had that little sheepish smile, and he would say, no. He had this very deep voice, and he said, no. He says, and he, you know, remember his finish move was the ankle lock, you know? He would take your ankle and just snap it. And he said, you know, he said if they didn't tap, he would just snap their ankles. And I asked him,
absolutely.
I said, didn't you run into real tough guys? He said, Sonny, I never lost because that was his livelihood. You know, he wasn't gonna lose. That was his mindset. He would snap their ankles and dug their eyeball out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, these are
That's
real
awesome.
legit
You know,
tough guys.
we have a special treat coming for the fans along those lines, because one of my mentors in submission grappling and MMA was the late Billy Wicks, who was from the Carnies, Take On All Comers, Carney guy. All the old timers like Jerry Briscoe, who we had on the show, have so many great stories about Billy Wicks. And I got the opportunity to learn from him. And also he introduced me to great Mephisto, Frankie Kane, who had done the Carnies, but also fought in the Smokers. And going back about 16 years ago, I did a DVD with those two guys as a tribute to them as my mentors. It was called The Tale of Two Carnies. And back at that time, a funny story, I was just talking to Neil Melanson this morning, who used to run Extreme Couture. He's Randy Couture's grappling coach, among many others. And he was telling me about how he gave that DVD to Randy, and Randy said, come over and watch it with me. And they watched it together, and they were in awe of these stories.
Cool.
Because Randy was really a guy that understood his roots from wrestling and the catch wrestling lineage. So that's awesome about Masa Saito. And that's really what our show is all about with old school shooters.
Well, I got to tell you one more story we go about Masa Saito. You know, he's the reason why WCW and New Japan had such a great relationship in 90s. And without him being on New Japan side and Eric Bischoff on WCW side, you know, we would have never had the relationship we had, and it has never been since. You know, many has tried. WWE tried WWE Japan, that failed, and AEW is trying to do a relationship, but you know, you have to be equal parts on both sides who trust each other to make that relationship work. But I'm going to tell you a quick Masa Saito story. Masa was married to a lady. His first wife was from Minnesota, and they were in Roppongi in a club on third floor in the city of Tokyo. Road Warrior Hawk, Mike, and Masa and Masa's wife, who was from Minnesota, a Caucasian lady. They were at the bar, and if you've been to Japan, you understand it's very small elevators, and bunch of Nebraska college football team. When Nebraska was really a tough team back then, they were playing in some kind of Japan Bowl, collegiate bowl, and they came up the elevator on the same bar that the Masa and Hawk was. Well, Masa and Hawk and Masa's wife decided to leave. So it's a small elevator. As the doors started to close, one of the football players said something derogatory towards Masa's wife. And you got to know Hawk. If of course, Hawk stops the elevator door, opens it back up, and it's on. What'd you say? I'm sure a few derogatory word was thrown, and to make the story short, Masa snapped 5 ankles that day, and needless to say, those 5 ankles and those 5 Nebraska football players didn't play football in Japan.
They never made it on the field. That's awesome.
There was actually footage of these guys, not suited on the sideline with the ankle in a cast.
That's awesome. And, that's a thing too, for guys that don't know what they're doing and aren't submission grab, the best thing to do is get an ankle and snap it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. If you remember when Frank Mir fought Brock Lesnar that first time, that's what he did. He was getting beat up, and he got a hold of that ankle. I watched that fight with Frankie Kane. I had him watch that with me, and he was a guy who loved the ankle crank, and that he set him up perfectly. Frank Mir set him, and then of course in the subsequent fight, Frank Mir got beat up pretty bad. Eric Paulson was Brock's coach, Brock's grappling coach there in Minnesota for the team out there with Marty Morgan. So that's a good tie-in too. We were talking about Shuto, but Soma, that is such an awesome story. I want to turn it over to Jack Kilby because I know he has a few fan questions.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got actually quite a few, Sonny. So we'll just rip through them in no particular order. We may jumble around the timeline a bit, but the Gore Lord wanted to know what your opinion of Onita was. You touched on FMW a bit.
Yeah, Onita started in New Japan. He came out of New Japan dojo, and whatever the reason, he was broke away from it. And I think it has to do something to do with maybe his size. He wasn't quite big enough because they were looking, a lot of the big star in New Japan was still, bigger guy and certainly in Japan. And I think that's Onita went out and found his own way with the extreme, he wanted to, he was a showman, just like our friend here, the King of Connecticut. He wanted to make sure the eyeball got on him, and he went to the sub part of professional wrestling. Those some of the matches with those explosion matches, barbed wire matches, fluorescent light bulb matches. I have a few good. Matter of fact, I spoke with Onita's office that we might be bringing some of those footage here in the U.S. Because I work for Fight TV, so we may be, you might be able to find some of that on the Fight TV very soon in 2023. But very nice man. But at the same time, once again, although a lot of crazy stuff, obviously, he don't mind bleeding, and what people don't realize is a lot of those guys. I'm sure there's a lot of tough guys who came from with martial arts and wrestling background and professional wrestling. But certainly, if you ran into a Japanese professional wrestler, I can almost bet, 8 out of 10 times, they have real strong martial art background. And last thing I want to do is mess with those guys. Just to say, it's better buying them a drink than try to mess with them.
Yes, because Sonny, let's look at that. Japanese uh, mixed martial arts, or what's called mixed martial arts now, came out of professional wrestling. Talk about Tiger Mask starting Shuto.
Well,
You had Pancrase.
Inoki was really,
Yeah,
Inoki
Inoki.
went,
Yep,
yeah,
yep. But also, Suzuki, and Pancrase
yeah,
and Rings came out of professional
yeah,
wrestling. They all did. Pride Fighting Championships came out of
sure,
professional wrestling. Nobuhiko Takada. So all of the professional wrestling, and even when you really get deep into it and you study combat sports history in Brazil and the Vale Tudo and who trained
yeah.
the Gracies, it's all linked into early days of shooters in professional wrestling. And that's why, I always tell people to buy my book, to buy Rough and Tumble, because you learn so much. We trace it all the way back to the days of the Martin Farmer Burns is from Iowa and the start of wrestling in Iowa. And it's a history that the fans really ought to know, because I mean, nowadays, I think, and that's why I'm so excited about working for Shoot Pro Wrestling. Nowadays, I don't like the way that the fans watch professional wrestling. They should be watching it as a sporting event and not as trying to be a booker or something. They should be able to be on the edge of their seat. And I'll tell you what Billy Wicks told me. And when he said, when you do professional wrestling, you let those people know there's not a damn thing you do in that ring to your opponent that you can't do to every one of those fat slobs that paid a ticket to see you. And it was true. I mean, that's the way that I did it, and that's why I brought Phil Baroni, who was just on the show, and Stefan Bonner and Kamal Shalarus into professional wrestling from MMA and from UFC, and told them the same thing. And I think that's what the fans really, they'll enjoy their experience more when it's strong and believable.
Yeah. Well, one thing, as I was saying about Masa and Haku, those guys, you know, they will not lose because they literally believe that they're protecting a business. So they're a shooter at heart. So they're not going to, like Masa said, I'll dig out somebody's eyeball. I mean, they're not going to lose in a street fight.
Yeah.
That just that's their mentality. And amazing amount of respect to them. I love Masa. I miss Masa a lot. And what a great, and he was one of the kind, Masa and Haku both, you know, they both held my babies, my kids, and they're the most gentlest, scariest man I know, but they were the most kind and gentlest man I also know. I can say that about Haku, and I think everybody will repeat about that. They're just, scary as that they are, and what they can do to another human being. Um, they're very
Sonny, I
kind.
think I think the fans would want to know this, and I'm sure there's probably a fan question in there. Speaking of Masa Saito, did he ever talk to you about what happened with him and Ken Patera?
Oh
Because he
yeah.
supposedly beat the hell out of some of those cops.
No, you know what really happened? From what Masa told me was this. They were in Wisconsin, and Masa ended up doing time in Wisconsin. And it's really unfair to Masa because I'm sure he didn't have the right representation. The Japanese guys working in the U.S. Didn't really be able to communicate. I'm sure. What Masa told me was that this is Masa's version. I mean, I wasn't there, but Ken Patera and Masa went to McDonald's. I think they walked over, from what I understand, from their hotel, and Ken couldn't get Mr. Patera could not get what he wanted, and whatever the reason, he got really upset and took a boulder and threw it out the window, threw it in the window, and broke the window. And of course, nobody gonna stop them, so they go back to their hotel room. At this point, Masa hasn't done anything, and they knocked on Masa's door in a hotel, and he sees a couple of cops, and one of the officer was a lady, and decided to spray him. You know, I'm sure they told him, hey, and there was no communication. And you can imagine, you know, Massa doesn't know what's going on. He has some idea why they're there, but he didn't do anything. So he gets, next thing you know, they want to arrest him. This little, you know, police officer want to arrest him and try to get physical with Massa and put a handcuff on him. And Massa, you know, Massa said, no, I didn't do anything. You're not, of course, he's speaking in Japanese, you know, and he resisted because you're not putting a handcuff on me. And next thing you know, they spray him with the mace. You know, Massa snatched the mace and chucked it and shoved the cop one way or another. That was it, you know, resisting arrest. And he did some quite a bit of time, not long period of time, but he got convicted for assaulting a police officer and ended up doing time.
Yeah, and the ironic part is Ken Patero has been interviewed on this channel numerous times, indicated that it wasn't him that threw a rock, but a disgruntled employee. And they basically sent a platoon of police officers to arrest Ken and Massa. So speaking of famous stories, we've had a couple of fan queries about the now infamous WCW Collision in Korea pay-per-view in 1995 in front of varying numbers of folks, including the profile of the 2-day event on the Vice Ring, Dark Side of the Ring series. One fan wanted to know in particular, Carlos, about the story whereby Hawk and Too Cold Scorpio got into a alleged physical altercation, and whether that was legit or not, simply because in the same story, Scott Flash Norton talks about how they were even listening to his phone calls, and he got dragged down and threatened for burying North Korea. Yeah, so people are just wondering if how and the logistics behind that fight between Scorpio and Hawk.
Well, yeah, I'll put in, you know, I'll put them in context that, first of all, you know, Scott Norton said they didn't tell us about, you know, watch your P's and Q's when you went to North Korea. Come on, Scott. We're going to North Korea. They told us, they told me, and I got called from Japanese government. I got called from U.S. government. They said, hey, we don't recommend you go. They flat out told us that. We can't guarantee your safety. You know, that's our government telling us that. And then when we, certainly New Japan guys, you know, none of the Korean descent New Japan guys went with us. Ricky Choshu was a Korean descent. He didn't go. And you know, listen, North and South Korea are at war. Of course he's not going to go there. And honestly, if you were Japanese, you know, Japanese, unfortunately, doing a war, occupied Korea, and they weren't very nice to those people. So, you know, their history of where they view Japan, and of course, their history of where they view the United States, you know, is whether it's propaganda or not, it's pretty negative. So for us to go there, of course they're going to look for any excuse to, you know, to use anything, if we did anything wrong, for the heathen that we are, the Americans, you know. And imagine this. I mean, imagine you're North Korean who has never seen American. All you have seen, or you image American, is these evil, over glutton monsters, right? And honestly, what does Scott Norton look like?
That's
Right?
how he looks.
You know, he is, you know, I mean, he's so big and barrel chested, that there goes, oh my God, you know what our government tell us in North Korea is true. Look at them, right? And of course, who's the leader of our group? Ric Flair, you know, bleach blonde and you know,
Oh, we got to get to Ric Flair too.
yeah. And so, you know, we fit the image of evil empire, right? And they told us, he said, don't bring any pornography, don't bring, you know, they're going to be watching and listening to us every minute we're there. They told us that. So I don't know how Scott missed that memo, but they did tell us to watch ourselves. And if you know anything a little bit about North Korea, you know, I think they told us that Mike Chnoy of CNN, who met us at the hotel, told us that the only person who's been to U.S. aside from, you know, the press, Americans have been there, either been captured, shot down, or, you know.
Except for D-Rod, except for old Dennis Rodman, right?
Right, who came many years later. And so, matter of fact, when they put us, when we got to the airport, Eric and I was in a car with our attaché, which was, I'm sure their Secret Service lady. She was with us everywhere we went. And one of the first things she turned, she sat in the front next to the driver, and Eric and I was in the back seat. She turned and looked at both of us and says, first thing she said to us, well, one of the first things she said to us was that, okay, don't rape our women. Eric and I looked at each other and said, we have no intention of raping anybody, certainly not here in North Korea. You know, I mean,
oh man,
you just think about that for a minute. You know, that's how we were a monster from this foreign country, and where they viewed us and we're portrayed in their country. They never seen American to begin with alive, or for that matter, you know, I don't know how many Japanese they have seen us, but you know, we were essence of evil, you know, as a human being to them. And
you know what? You know, Sonny, let me ask you this: why? And I understand that with the propaganda. Why then did they bring American and Japanese professional wrestling over for a show? It seems kind of counterintuitive, right?
Well, see, Antonio Inoki, this was all came from Antonio Inoki's relationship with North Korea, right? Because of Riki Dozan, you know, Antonio Inoki's the father of Japanese pro wrestling.
Oh yeah, now I knew Riki Dozan was originally Korean. Was he from North Korea?
He's a North Korean.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So we actually, while we were there, we went to visit his house where he grew up. It's kind of shrine there.
There's a crazy shoot story staying on topic with the show that we can't glaze over. Riki Dozan and Masahiko Komura, and the legend fable. I'm not sure how much truth there is to it, but with Riki Dozan shooting on Komura in the ring, and then subsequently Riki Dozan drinking at his bar and getting stabbed to death with a rusty blade and beating the guy up that stabbed him to death, but continuing to hang out and drink, and then dying at his bar. And the legend, as it goes, at least, and this is an old shooter story, is that the killer was sent by Masahiko Komura. Is there any? Do you? I'm sure you've heard the story, but
yeah,
what do you
I
have
heard
to
the
take on
story.
that?
So put things in context. So what happened was, fact that Riki Dozan was Korean. You know, Kimura was a judo guy and judo champion.
Yeah.
Probably gave up quite a bit of weight, I think, to Riki Dozan for that matter.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And he was, I don't know if it was a shoot or work fight, but you know,
It was definitely a pro wrestling match. That it's interesting because the top grappler in the world right now is just on Joe Rogan's show with Gary Tonin, and they watched that. And Rogan, when they all thought it was turned into a shoot, because it's a
Mm.
legendary fable. And the reason that it bleeds over into MMA and jiu-jitsu is because the Kimura is named after Masahiko Kimura when he broke Elio Gracie's arm with that hold in a match.
Right. Well, what's interesting is so from what story goes is that Japanese mafia, maybe Yakuza, didn't take kindly to the fact that Japanese champion judokai lost to not a pro wrestler, but lost to a Korean. I think that's, you know, because of, you got to remember the time period here. This
Sure.
is not that far, you know, after the war where Japanese occupied Korea, you know, and so they didn't take kindly to that. And I think I think, you know, I don't know what the story is, and I think what I think is that, you know, some of the Japanese people, gangster, didn't take kindly to that, and I think that bled into the Rikidozan's death, and going back because of he was a father of pro wrestling and of course the Giant Baba and Antonio Inoki being the top two student of Rikidozan, All Japan, New Japan, and being a politician that Mr. Inoki is, you know, he kept that relationship, and that's where the
Sure.
pro wrestling comes into. And getting back to your original question, and so him becoming a member of a diet, which is like a senator here in the U.S., you know, kept that the bridge of the relationship with North Korea. Inoki was the only one who was going over there, having this relationship. Matter of fact, Inoki's relationship was so strong with the you know, this peace festival, what Inoki called, that's what we were there for, to introduce American through pro wrestling, which is kind of odd, like you said, but it is as a goodwill. You know, we can still compete, but we don't have to kill each other, kind of thing, right? And introduce the citizens of North Korea to this art form or this entertainment. And because Inoki had such a great position in North Korean and great leader Kim Sung-yeol, they printed money just for Inoki while we were there. He had his own money for a couple of different reasons, so that citizens of North Korea can hoard U.S. dollar.
Sure.
You have to exchange it. That was one of the reasons. And I have a stamps that was with Inoki's likeness.
Wow.
I mean, it was that big a deal. You know, they said what I was told was that it took 5 years planning to have that event there in North Korea. And if you've been there, if you've seen the video, the Mayday Stadium, where there's 185,000, 189,000 people. And if you can imagine how big it was, with that on one side of the stadium, they made like a pixel. Every little kid had a flip card. And think of that as a pixel in a television. And they shot missiles, no kidding, from North Korea, and these animation pixels, and they would shoot this missile. They would shoot this missile across the whole side of the stadium with these pixels and aim towards the United States while we're sitting there watching this show.
Wow. So it's kind of a show of power too. That's wild.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's a
You know,
great
I know we're going to be running low on time, and there's something I didn't want to miss here. And have you seen what's been going on lately between Ric Flair and your good friend Eric Bischoff.
Yeah, I saw some of those. Yeah.
Oh man,
Well,
did you see what happened between, well, Jack can tell you.
Well, a long story short, Mr. Flair took exception to some of the exchanges that had with Wendy at the time, and made some comments that were synopsized on the Hannibal TV here, probably in a moment of lapsed
Who
Moment of
judgment.
drunkenness,
But
I think.
who was speaking? Jack. Who was speaking?
it was Ric Flair exchanging some text messages with the King. He had taken
Yeah,
exception.
so essentially what happened was my law firm wanted Rick to come down to host an event, and I had known Rick casually for some years, and he was very interested in a woman that I had partying on his boat on Lake Lanier, and seeing some pictures of her, some rather saucy pictures of her, which he asked me to send. And when he got the pictures, his Wendy saw them, and that started his drunken, nasty tirade texts to me. And then he and Wendy ended up splitting up. And Wendy told me, she's like, oh, he's hammered every day after 3 p.m, and he's unbearable. So I sent her a picture of me because I thought they were split. I was hanging out in the pool, and I said, she went back and forth. Let's get together for some mimosas because she lives here in Florida. Well, she took the picture, sent it back to Rick, and then Rick threatened to kill me and said he was going to find me and all this stuff. And it became a big story. I just had fun with it. And I'll say, like I said to Jack, and I've said before, Rick, I wish you and Wendy nothing but the best. And you have nothing to worry about, Ric Flair. Wendy's a wonderful woman, but she's 2 cup sizes too small, and she's 40 years old for this king. 40 years too old for this king. So yeah, we had our own little, and now Eric is having his similar tirades back and forth with Rick. And I'd say Eric's been very laid back and professional, but Rick is being Rick.
Listen, I love Ric Flair. I truly believe, in my take, as a professional wrestling entertainer goes, I think he's one of the best. If he's not the best, he's certainly one of the best. I have nothing but respect for him. He can, as a professional wrestler, he can make me look good. And I don't know nothing about professional wrestling and ring stuff. And he's amazingly entertaining. He's one of the best. He made in North Korea. He made Inoki look like $1 million times 5. I have nothing but respect for Rick. And those of you who don't know Ric Flair is just like the Ric Flair what you see on television. He's not faking it. That's Rick. He is, limousine riding, champagne drinking. That's him. And love him. I'm fortunate that Rick and Eric, after all these years, is having a little, spats. But listen, Eric's a dear friend of mine, and I have nothing but respect for Ric Flair. And anybody who knows Rick, right? He ain't
Oh
gonna
yeah,
take
I love
anything laying down. So
I love Rick, and I said this to Rick, and I still love to do it. I said, Rick, I'll give you your revenge. You have this heat with me. I'll give you 20 unanswered chops in the ring. You can chop all the skin off my chest, and I'll give you Rick's revenge. And I know the fellow Bill Hazelwood, who hosted the Gathering in Winston, Salem, where they had Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard, and they were on board. I wanted them to be Rick's enforcer. So if I got out of the ring and tried to scurry off, they tossed me back in the ring. But Rick hasn't gone for it yet. But I wish you a Merry Christmas, Rick. And again, this chest is all yours for the chopping if you wanna do it.
Well, Sonny, we're rapidly running out of time, but I wanted to squeeze in just perhaps one more fan question from Twitter,
Okay.
who asked about your time managing, some of the premier luchadors in WCW
Yeah.
during that really groundbreaking period. I believe Psychosis and LA
La Parca, yeah, LA Parca.
La Parca. Yeah, did you have a sense at the time just how business changing and revolutionary the invasions of the luchadors into WCW and prominence in that prime TV time was?
Yeah, I mean, I was in essence, I'm new to the business, so I was involved in it for a couple of different reasons. Obviously, it was really easy, and I'm blessed and honored that I had opportunity to manage all the Japanese greats, right? Hokuto, Bo Nakano, Masa Saito, Kensuke Sasaki, Jushin Thunder Liger, Chono, Kanemoto, Otani, and Great Muta, and many, many more for that matter. But I think two things I got to do that I think was great was that when I got to manage the luchador, one, because I became, in essence, I was a mouthpiece, right? And style is so different. They're high flying, the luchadors, where Japanese wrestling professional wrestling is a little tighter, a lot closer. Being a shooter, I mean, they make you believe, those chops are really chops. They're not, those hold that they get you in, it's a legit hold. And when lucha style is a little bit more on this side of a center, where a high flying, unbelievable, almost acrobatic stuff. So when you take somebody like Ultimate Dragon, who combined those two of style wrestling, and I think that's one of the reasons why the people like Ultimate Dragon and those Japanese who studied and in Mexico as well. I think that those are one of the great wrestlers as far as entertaining wrestling goes. I was honored to be able to manage those guys because I knew they were the top, top of luchadors that was coming over. And you know what made WCW so great? And it was one of the reasons was because we had time. You can't do 3-hour Nitro without having unbelievable wrestling by luchadors and Japanese. Yes, there was obviously storyline of Sting, NWO, Hulk Hogan, Hall and Nash, all those storylines, which was, the mainstay of professional wrestling. But at the same time, you can't just eat, filet mignon all day long, right? You gotta have the fruit and salad on both sides of that thing and some veggies, and that's what we were, and made those 3-hour Nitro certainly entertaining and enough variety for many of the fans. And I think that's what made Nitro so great.
Yeah, it was such a great time, Sonny. It was such a great time. And
Unbelievable.
like a variety show, like you said, you can't have everything the same on any show, or you're going to lose the audience. And I think WCW did a great job of blending the different styles of wrestling and entertainment. I remember some of the great characters and gimmicks that were funny too back in that time, like the Mama Lukes were a funny one that I enjoyed. I just saw Vito here in Florida back a few months ago. So yeah, man, it's been great having you on. I see, Jack, that our guests are getting impatient. Our next guests, because we had a delay. I see the texts coming along the banner. But Sonny, this was an awesome show. I want to give you an opportunity, Sonny, first to plug anything that you have going on?
Well, you know what? There's a couple of announcements going to be made. I can't make it public yet, but there will be new, different kind of women wrestling. Involves all the Joshis. Many Japanese, one of the great Japanese independent star will be coming over as a group with a new company starting in the United States. I think it's based out of close to you, out of New York. So that's something you can look forward to in the coming year. And of course, I'll be going over. I'm a big fan of Joshi wrestling. How tough they are, how dedicated they are, and you got to remember we're talking about WCW. Akira Hokuto, Bo Nakano, Kyuri Suzuki, Ozaki. We introduced those real tough women wrestling way before what is now in WWE and certainly in AEW.
That's awesome. I look forward to seeing that. That's a style of wrestling I love, and we can get some of them maybe on a Great North wrestling show with the great Jack Kilby.
All right, yeah, I would love to do it.
Well, we appreciate you again taking your time today, Sonny. Love to have you back. I feel like we've just scratched the surface. I still have about a couple of pages of fan questions. So sometimes, hopefully, in the new year, if you could find the time again, we'd be honored to have you on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And it's great. I don't do too many of these, and I love the opportunity. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sonny. And we just blew through an hour. So we've got our first one was almost a half hour. I said, let's do another 20 minutes, but time flies when you have a great guest like Sonny Onoo. And I want to thank Sonny Onoo for coming on. Absolute pleasure. And I want to kind of close with a little song from the chairman of the board that we like to close with, and a little singing for everyone on this Christmas season. Right. I'll put my hat on for this. I've been to town, beyond the boulevard and down the beach, and I've learned things that only time can teach. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Old School Shooters. We are Silver Sages spreading knowledge to the younger ages. Happy holidays, everybody. Enjoy. Peace.